kind of what we're going to do today, my purpose in having the webinar is, again, knowing that there's still kind of the cultural piece. I know that the regions do their annual renewal of standing at this time of year, and that just naturally generates a number of changes that need to be submitted. So I thought this was a good time to go through and cover that process that's built into CDM Plus for submitting changes to Brenda in the Office of Christian Vocation up at DHM. So what we'll cover today is just kind of the pointing out that we're playing with two different databases here, regional and general databases, and how those things talk to each other. We'll need to look at in the regional program, that's where we're really going to be spending our time. I'll be bringing up a test copy of a regional CDM Plus program, looking at church and individual records, because that's really where the information is that gets shared, that gets communicated to DHM. Talk a little bit specifically about what gets shared, how ministry positions get mapped and communicated from a regional database to a general church database. And then looking specifically at how those changes get submitted and where we store a record of the changes that have been submitted as well. So those are the things that we hope to hit on today, and that should take us about 30 minutes or so is my guess. So we are talking about two different databases here. There is the regional version of CDM Plus that each regional office has. This has the search and call pieces in it and so forth. There's also a database that here at Saran we refer to as Doc General. It's the Disciples Christ General database. Both of these are CDM Plus databases. They do look different in each interface. Where they are similar is the general database has church records in it, and those church records, if you opened up church records on the general database, you'd see a window that looks exactly like a church record in a regional database. So a lot of that same information is there. The difference is in your regional database, you just have church records for the churches that are in your region, whereas the DHM database has church records for all of the churches that are or have been listed in the yearbook. Where things get different is in the DHM database, there are minister records. And a minister record will have both the information for the minister's credentials, contact information, and if they're in search and call, their profile information is all part of this one big minister record. That's different then, and sometimes we talk past each other, I've noticed, because in the regional database, I have a membership program, and that's where I have individual and address records that I use to keep track of my ministers. So if I have a minister in my region, I have an individual record for them that's connected to an address record. If I have profile information, well, that's over in the search and call part of the program on what the regional version of the program calls a minister record. So that's a difference that we see. So the changes from the regional office are submitted out of this individual and address information. The general database then receives and processes those changes. So there's a difference there. But what's in that general database that provides the input for the printed green pages in the yearbook and directory, as well as the online ministers directory. The ministers directory has evolved in the last 2 years to not just be a static once-a-year document that gets printed, but living real-time information as well. And so it's important to have this process underhand and really be submitting changes all year long so that that online ministers directory is as current as possible. And it's incumbent on the regions to make sure that information is updated and current. So this process helps us keep information current and available to folks. So we need to have some kind of connection between information that's in the general database in Indianapolis and the information that's in your regional database. And there are a few key places where that is. The main piece of connective tissue between these two databases is the minister PIN. And that's the 9-digit number that you might see on a minister's profile. As we look at information on the Doc Minister tab in the regional database, we'll see where that PIN is entered. What we do when we're trying to communicate information from the regional database to the general database is we compare that minister PIN to know whose information that we're working with. Churches also have PINs, and this is the 6-digit number. It's the same PIN that identifies a church to the yearbook, that identifies a church to Treasury Services, and we use that so that we say, when we say a minister has a position at a certain church, we key that off of that church PIN so that when we communicate that information up to the general database, we're able to match that up. The other piece is Doc General. The general database has ministry positions, so a minister can have a position at a particular church. Well, in the regional database, we're also able to record on that minister's church tab that this minister has a position at a certain church. And I'm gonna go into my Disciples of Christ cynical mode at the moment and say that we have 32 regions, which probably means we have about 47 different ways of defining ministry positions. Well, somehow we have to map all of that to the general database, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So that's kind of the introductory pieces. We can pause here. I actually need to change my screen share around so that we can actually get CDM Plus open and start taking a look at some of these things. So certainly if you have questions at this point while I'm getting my screen share shifted around. All right, so again, a lot of the information in the regional database centers off of the individual record. So ministers have, each minister should have an individual record in your regional database. And I will throw up the disclaimer at this point. The test database that we use for the regional program is actually a copy of the database for the Christian Church in Indiana. So as we are looking at these individual records, we're really looking at real people here with real contact information. So I just throw that up as a way of disclaimer. So on your individual records, the way you identify in your database that someone is a minister is by checking this minister box on the name tab of the individual record. Now, this minister checkbox doesn't have anything to do with whether or not they have standing. It just indicates that this person is a minister, and what that does is opens up information over here on the Doc Minister tab. So I'm going to do a quick search here for records where minister is equal to yes, where that box is checked. And okay, we can work with David Covelo St. John. So you can see here that we have some address information here that it's been overridden so that Dave gets mail from the region at the church address. I can also use this address jump button and just open up the address record for Dave and Karen as well. And when we communicate changes or information to the general database, what we're doing is we're pulling address information either from this address record for the minister, or in the case of like this where the address has been overridden, we're going to pull the address from here. We're also going to submit phone numbers and email addresses. And here again is a place where each region will define these phone and email types for themselves. And this is a place where when Brenda receives the change, she often has to edit these to match a phone or an email type that's in the general database. Again, we didn't want to predefine these for folks or force some kind of change to information that was already there. We will pull gender from the personal tab, but the real crux of what happens in this change is what's on the Doc Minister tab. And again, this tab is available, but it doesn't show any information unless I have this minister box checked over here on the name tab. So on the Doc Minister tab, you can see that this lower part is divided into two sections. What's on the left-hand side here is information that is in your regional database. So if I scroll down through, you'll see that this is where that piece of connective tissue is. This is where the minister pin is entered, and you see that here this minister pin is identical to, on the right-hand side of the window, this is information that's coming directly from the general database. When we opened this tab up, the program actually went out and looked in the general database and said, hey, here is this minister pin. Show me this information. So we can see on this right-hand side what the general database has: the minister pin, minister standing code, the minister's professional code, whether or not that minister has standing. So just with those four pieces of information here, those correspond here. And you can see that in the general database, we have Dave marked as being ordained in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. We don't have a standing code here, so that's something visually I can see that I could correct by clicking change and updating the standing code. Now, I would point out that the standing code and the professional code, these are codes that are defined by the General Commission on Ministry. So as a region, you can't come in and just create new ones. Other information off of here that will get submitted to DHM is the ordination date, the ordination region. And you can see that we do have in the general database, Dave's ordination date is January 1, 1981, matches what we have on the regional side. We've not entered any ethnic codes for Dave on the regional side. Again, on the left-hand side here, this is what's in your regional database. And I can see that on the general side, we have Dave marked as being European descent. So again, this is something that I could change to bring the regional piece of the database into sync. So I click change, and here under ethnic codes, now here are my selections. I can choose European descent. Again, this is a list of ethnic codes that is defined by the General Commission on Ministry. Regions don't get to add ethnic codes, but now you can choose more than one for folks who identify as part of more than one ethnic population. Now, if you'll bear with me for a minute, I realized that I needed to give myself permission here. Get my individual records back up. All right, so there's my individual record back again. Now, what I needed to do was I needed to fix my permissions so that this important button, Submit DOC Ministerial Changes, was lit up and ready to go. So I want to look at one last little piece, though, of information from the general side or OCV piece. We do have a church position listed for Dave, First Christian Church in Valparaiso, Indiana. That should coordinate with what's on the church tab for Dave. So you see what we've got is we do have church being First Christian in Valparaiso. We show his position as being senior minister, and we show that he started May 19th of 2006. We have that start date listed. Back over on the Doc Minister tab, I don't have that start date yet. So if I've made changes for David and I'm ready to pass those along to Brenda for updating, I'm going to click the Submit DOC Ministerial Changes button. And now what the program is going to do is this regional program is going to go out to the general database. It's going to compare the information between the two, and it's going to bring this window up that shows me all of the differences. So if I submit this change, the information that is going to be sent to Brenda to see as changed is a change in the greeting or the preferred name. We're going to set that to Dave. You see what we've done is we've just looked, and here are all the differences. Phone numbers and email addresses that can be added. And down here at the bottom, a minister church position that we saw in the church tab, Valparaiso, First Christian Valparaiso, with this start date of May 19th, 2006. And notice that in position, we're seeing pastor of a recognized congregation. And this is where we need to map the information that we see over here on the, I'm going to have to submit that and show, but we have mapped the position that we've defined in our database to positions that exist in the general database. And I'm going to show you in just a minute where that is. So to go ahead and send this change along, and Brenda, I'm working with test copies of everything, so this is not a change that you will see, but I would say it's really, really nice if you always put something in the notes that lets Brenda know why it is that you're submitting this change, and it'll be good for your records as well, because we're gonna store this change. So submitting changes, standing review.
Hey, Dean, can I
Yes.
just want to say, I noticed on this one that the work location is set to First Christian Valparaiso, and generally the work location in our database is used for chaplain positions, and we put all churches on the church tab in our database.
And so my expectation is what you generally do when you see one like this is you would ignore that change.
That's correct. Yes.
And yeah, let me point, when I submit this and get back to the individual record, let me point that out, because that is important information. And what we'll see is some remnant of how regions have recorded where a minister is serving from years gone by. So
Okay.
I put in the reason why I'm submitting this change. My email address is here, just in case Brenda has a question. She's able to click a link that says, hey, send something back to Dean. When I click the submit button, and I've now submitted the changes successfully. Now note that what I've actually done is submitted essentially that form that you just saw to Brenda. She still has to put eyes on it. Neither the regional database nor the general database can directly update the other. There is no way that a change from the general database can automatically populate into your regional database and vice versa. And the other thing we have done is we have a ministerial changes tab on the individual record, where we now keep a history of all the changes that have been submitted for that minister. And again, here's a good reason to put something in that notes field, because you'll be able to call back to mind why this change was submitted. Was this a new minister to the region? Did we add or remove standing? Did somebody's standing code or professional code change? That sort of thing. Now I do want to come back over to the Doc Minister tab, because Brenda did mention work location. The shift now is that if somebody is serving a Disciples of Christ congregation, so if somebody is serving a congregation that's listed in the yearbook that has a church pin, then we should be recording that information on that minister's church tab and submitting that way. Well, for years, several regions have recorded where a minister was serving, whether it was a Disciples Church, UCC Church, some civic or clinical place, if they're a chaplain. All of that was recorded in this workplace field. Now, if someone is serving in a setting other than a Disciples of Christ congregation, then yes, we still need to list that in the workplace so that that's recorded as work location in the minister's directory. But it would be good to have their service to Disciples churches recorded on the church tab with begin and end dates as those are appropriate. A couple of important pieces off of the church tab. I think this is true for most everybody. It may or may not be, but being able to map, okay, this is First Christian Church of Valparaiso, and when that gets up to the general database, being able to match that up. Well, that is the church pin information. Again, that's that same 6-digit number that identifies a church to the yearbook or identifies it to Treasury Services, Valparaiso. So this number of 150253 also exists in the church record for this church in the general database, and that's how we're able to match that up. So you do want to make sure on your church records, let me bring that back up again. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. That this pin, this, under information, this third box down on the left-hand side, that information is set correctly for your churches. That's also important if you're going to import yearbook statistics into your CDM Plus database, which is another topic for another day. The other thing that we need to be able to do is map this position that the region has defined as senior minister to a position that's used in the general database. Now, the positions in the general database actually do match up to the professional codes. But we've got to map those somehow, because in the case where Indiana may call this position senior minister, another region might call it pastor. Some regions might just say associate. Others might put an abbreviation like ASSOC, minister. And we don't want to force those position descriptions onto regions. We want regions to be able to work in the way that they naturally think and naturally talk. So we just need to be able to map these positions from the regional database to the general database. And we do that on a system preference. So when I open up System Preferences, I get this window, and there's a tab here for Regional. And on that tab, what's down here in this left-hand column is any position that I have used on anybody's church tab. That's what defines something as being a church position as far as we're looking at it. Now, in Indiana's case, they've put in front in parentheses here, church. Again, your region, however you've defined these, whatever you put on your church tab for a position, that's what's going to show up here. So what we've done, for example, on this row, where I have the position on the church tab called Associate Minister, I'm mapping that to a position in the DHM database called Associate Minister. So if I've got Regional Minister on somebody's church tab, I'm mapping that to a position called Minister Employed by region. Here is Senior Minister that maps to pastor of a recognized congregation. If I need to make a change here, then I can drop that list down and make a change. Matter of fact, let me do that for student minister, because this is one where we actually could make a meaningful change. Right now we have student minister mapped to pastor of a recognized congregation. We have a position code at DHM called student pastor. It makes more sense to map that way and save it. Now, whenever I submit a change for a minister and we see on the church tab their position as student minister, when that gets recorded in the DHM database, it'll be recorded with the position student pastor. Does that make sense, how we have to map those things one to another? I'm going to take the silence to mean that everything is clear as mud. Are there other questions at this point? We've covered a lot of ground in the space of about 30 minutes, and I want to make sure we've really hit everything.
Dean, this is Bonnie.
Yeah, Bonnie.
Just wanted to confirm it is up to the region to determine how the positions they have listed match up to the ones that are in the OCV database, right?
That's correct. That's correct. The positions, that's another place, the positions in the OCV database are defined by the General Commission on Ministry. And so we have to map a region of the way the region talks and thinks about these positions to that list. And that's the region's responsibility to do that. If you have something on the church tab for a minister and we have a position here that has not been mapped, then we will not submit this line off the church tab. So if a change for a church is not going through, one thing you might take a look at is, do I have this position mapped, or do we have this position coded correctly? Any other questions? I mean, feel free to unmute your mic and let fly. Before we get away, I do want to go over. I want you to see what this looks like from Brenda's side as well. And I want to emphasize that one of the things, technology can only help us so far. There are cultural pieces here as well, in that for years and years and years, the reason we did this was to make sure the green pages of the yearbook and directory were current. And so it became this once a year big project that every region would review all the ministers and submit changes in mass to Brenda. And the reality of it is that these changes are happening all year long. Changes in address, getting new ministers into the region, having ministers leave the region. And it's good if we submit those changes as we're going. Now, certainly, we'll do this review as we're doing the standing renewal process and we're picking up changes there. But certainly, we lighten that load, both for the region and for folks at DHM, if we're making these changes throughout the year as they go on. The other side of that is, again, there is a real-time online web-based ministers directory that folks have access to. And what happened there?
Dean, while you're searching,
Yeah.
I'll touch on the live ministers directory in WebMem Pro. We do have to create a record for them in order for them to access that. So they have to have a login and password and login email to WebMem Pro to do that.
So now I'm in the a test version of the general database, and you can see that my menu items are just a little bit different. But when there are changes to be processed, we'll come in and do process minister changes. And that's going to list all of these things that are pending that haven't been done yet. So you can see here, December 12th, a change was submitted for David Covelo St. John. And if I click on that, well, there's the change that we just submitted. And so now it's a matter of saying, yes, we're going to process these changes. They can be applied, come back to later. That's what this looks like when it's received. On the general church side, you see basically Brenda gets the same format with the check boxes for what gets processed at any given time. There's also a minister changes tab in the general database as well, so we have this ongoing history of changes that have been going on for a minister. That hits everything that I had wanted to cover. Questions, thoughts?
Yes. Dean?
Yes.
Eugene here. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Bishop. How are you?
That's fine. Putting forth a change for a minister who's deceased, who's recently deceased.
One of the things we're working on right now, the general database does not have a way to indicate that a minister is deceased. We're working on that. That's a change that's coming soon. One of the things that you will do in your regional database is you'll mark, you'll have a status that you can set as deceased. You'll probably turn off the has standing flag because we don't grant standing to deceased persons. And so that's a change that you would submit. And I would put in the notes that go with that change that this person passed away and include their death date there, because we then would, on the minister change, have a record of that as well.
Okay, thanks so much.
All right. The other change, Eugene, in your regional database that should be made when somebody passes away is on the name tab of the individual record. There's a box called Do Not Print. I would check that one on, and that will stop that person being listed as a minister in your region in those places where we're trying to match things up.
Will do.
All right. Any other questions, comments? Again, we've been recording the meeting, and so I'll make that recording available as soon as I can, so that you can go back and review it. And there is also, when I have taught the regional classes at the CDM Plus Users Conference, there is a bundled set of those class handouts that really cover all of the search and call pieces, church records, minister records, submitting changes. If you don't have a copy of that, email me to Dean, D-E-A-N, at Suran, SURAN.com, and ask me for it, and I'll shoot a copy out to you, because that's the closest we have to a manual for the DOC regional pieces.
So how should we designate our request?
Just shoot an email to me and ask for the Disciples Regional class handouts.
Handouts. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll shoot the PDF back to you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, very, very good. And certainly, as you're looking at these kind of setup things, if you get stuck, or just if there's a question, part of what you're paying for and part of what your dues to the College of Regional Ministers is paying for is premier support for CDM Plus. And what that means is you can call the support number. In fact, let me just put that up here. You can call 1-800-633-9581 as often as you need to. Another avenue for that, if you don't need quite as immediate a response, is you can email support@cdmplus.com. And generally we respond to those within 24 hours, usually shorter than that. So do take advantage of the support capabilities that you've got. And if there aren't other questions or thoughts or comments, I'll pause for just a second and let those going once, going twice. All right. Well, I will thank you all for your time. I appreciate you taking a few minutes to settle in, and you'll get an email from me as soon as the recording is available with a link to where you can review what we've covered today. So thank you so much. Happy standing renewal season to all of you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, kind
Dean.
sir.
All right. Thank you. Take care.